We're in the bridge between summer and fall, I guess, here. And Brooke found another mushroom in his neighborhood today. This is it here in the wood chips. Anybody have a guess for this red staining mushroom?
Leucoagaricus americana.
Yep. The reddening lepiota. You may see this one again, but this is one of the edibles, but as Brooke mentioned earlier, it turns your urine reddish, I guess. So the email, the original email that went out for this meeting has a link, about the third link down, for this Mycoflora Project page that's on my website for the Chicago Mycoflora Project. And on this page, there's different links here for you to learn how to use iNaturalist. This first bunch of links is iNaturalist use and some videos on that, and there's some good NAMA videos here about why Mycoflora projects are important. There's some more related resources here, but there's a link here, top 10 lists. And I put together this this weekend to sort of organize how I go through some examples on iNaturalist. Instead of just randomly going through and looking at what's on there, we're gonna go through these top 10 lists that I made this past year. We won't look at every single thing, but you can go back and look at these yourself on your own time. And a lot of these species, I also, there's a link to an iNaturalist observation, these numbers, and there's also a link to Michael Kuo's page on that species, and a few of them have links to a few other things. But there's 5 lists here, and we'll see how we get through here. There's the top 10 most common choice edibles, the top 10 most common poisonous mushrooms in Chicago area, the top 10 most common macro-fungi. These are basically all the visible fungi, mushrooms and polypores and brackets, everything we are familiar with. The top 10 most common of those, and those are mostly all wood rotters here. Then there's the top 10 most common gilled mushrooms, mushrooms with gills. And this includes some of the edible and poisonous ones, so some of these are repeats. And then there's a top 10 list of the most common genera that are difficult to identify as species. So we may not go into that. And then at the end, there's some cool stuff and a couple quiz questions. So we'll look at those a little later. So I'm not going to look at everything here. Some of these edibles, if you don't know these edibles, you should check these out. Chicken mushroom, I'm sure most of you know that, or if you have tried it out. Then we're going to look at the chanterelles, Gyroporus, castaneus, hen of the woods. I'll skip that one. I think most of you know that one. Honeycaps. I'm going to skip the giant puffball. You know that one pretty good. We'll look at the oyster and this other sulfur shelf and Pleurotus and the Entoloma. And we'll do some of those fairly quick here. So here's a really nice picture of Laetiporus sulphureus. So this is a young, fairly young sulfur shelf. It's bright orange on top, and it's got a yellow edge and bright yellow pores underneath. So that one, you should all know that one. We'll skip over to Laetiporus cincinnatus, the white-pored chicken mushroom. This is also a parasite, but it's on the roots and the base of the tree. So this is usually on the ground. It's orangish on top, a little bit pinkish, but it is missing the yellow pigment. So the pores are white to cream, and the cap on the top is missing the yellow part. So it's just a duller orange instead. And this is the better edible of the two. That's the opinion of people who have tried both of those. Then chanterelles. Greg and I and Andy and some other people published this new Chicago chanterelle about 4 years ago. This is, I think, one of the better images on iNaturalist for it. It shows it when it's fairly young and shows the some of the key features I look for. So this is our most common yellow chanterelle around the Chicago area. It's found all the way over to Ohio and down to Missouri. We're still learning the distribution of it. I don't know. I'm guessing it goes up into Wisconsin. I don't remember if I have Wisconsin records or not. It might be in Minnesota, but I'm not sure. The key features are that when the cap is young, it's got a very pale greenish tint on the yellow cap. So that kind of shows up here. You can see the cap margin is greenish. And the thing I look for is the color of the margin in contrast to the ridges underneath. So when you compare the yellow stem and the yellow cap to the ridges, especially when it's younger or fresh, the ridges look more orange in contrast to the cap and the stem. So you can see that there's a little green on the yellow on the margin, and then the ridges are more orange, and then the stem is yellow. And this is one of the chanterelles that stain reddish, and I don't know if anybody's figured out why these chanterelles stain reddish. There's multiple ones that do that when they're bruised. Here it is at the, a little bit dried out at our annual foray show. This was taken by John Plischke. Oh, sorry. This observation's by Alan Rockefeller when he came up for our annual mushroom show. And then John Plischke identified it, and then I agreed with that identification. So that's our Chicago chanterelle. This is one that, oh, I forgot who Heel Splitter is. Do you remember who Heel Splitter is, Brooke? I don't remember. I'm sorry on these usernames.
It's Django Myers.
Oh, Django, yeah. So this is a Chicago chanterelle from Ohio that he found. And he did send me a specimen of one from Ohio, so we want to get that sequenced. But this shows the same features. You can see the cap edge is a little bit green, and the yellow stem is different, more yellow than the ridges. These ridges are a bit paler. There are different color forms for this chanterelle, which is really interesting, and we want to get more DNA samples on the different color forms. So this was an example of one that's a little bit paler underneath, but it's got the green margin. And then here is one of Brooke's favorite collections. This is a white chanterelle that we got at Fermilab. I think it was Fermilab. Yeah, this is one of our Fermilab forays. So we have this, and we want to get this sequenced. But our Chicago chanterelle can be missing most of the yellow-orange pigments, but still sometimes have a little tint of green or grayish on the cap. And you can see the ridges are very faint pink. So it's a really pretty color combination. But this is the same as our Chicago chanterelle. There's other chanterelles that have white or paler color forms in the US and over in Europe. Bart Buick did some, with his colleagues in Europe, did work, and they figured out that some of the chanterelle species in Europe are actually color forms of other species. So they did some lumping of the European chanterelles. Here's Gyroporus castaneus. It's a little bolete. It's one of our favorite edibles. It's fairly easy to identify: a chestnut brown cap and stem, and the white pores. The pores will turn a little bit yellow because the spores are yellow. And it's got a different texture than the other boletes. You usually don't find very many at a time. So what Brooke does is dries them and saves them up in a jar until he has enough to make a meal out of them. This shows the nice little pores. The stem texture is quite different in these Gyroporus mushrooms. Here's a nice picture of Armillaria mellea. This is a good one that shows how the ring on mellea, the regular yellow honeycap mushroom, has a very membranous, sturdy ring here. White gills with white spores, yellowish cap, and it grows in clumps. And the caps are fairly smooth. If it has hairs, it's not as obviously hairy as Armillaria gallica, which is a bit more common. That's more brown and very hairy on top, and not in big clumps. So mellea is usually in clumps of 10 to 50. Gallica is usually smaller clumps or single, and we'll see the gallica has a different ring when we get to that one. This one's taken by Chris in Genoa, Illinois. There's 2 oyster mushrooms. Well, several oysters we get. 2 of them are the Pleurotus ostreatus, the cool season oyster mushroom. This is a good edible when it's fresh. Oyster mushrooms have a stem that's mostly lateral or absent, and then it has gills, and the spore color is white or very pale lavender for a couple of the oysters. This one's taken by Lorinda Suze up near the airport. And if you look at our summer oyster, this is Pleurotus pulmonarius. It's whiter, comes out in the summer, and has more of a central stem. These are fairly young, and is in the warm weather, like July, early August. So this picture is in, Jeff took this in July this year. Jeff did our program on iNaturalist early this year, if you happened to be there. He talked about using iNaturalist. He's one of the big users. He's got 18,000 observations on iNaturalist of birds and plants and flowers and mushrooms. Here's, Grant took this picture of Entoloma abortivum. This is the aborted stage, and Entoloma abortivum is a mushroom. This is the actual Entoloma fruit body. And Entoloma is a group mostly, some of these Entolomas are mycorrhizal and some we're not sure if they're just saprobes or what, but this particular Entoloma interacts with honeycaps, and this aborted form is actually the honeycap that got aborted by the mycelium from the Entoloma. So the Entoloma grows over, interferes with the mushroom development of the honeycap, and then you get these clusters of aborted honeycaps. This is also called hunter's heart or shrimp of the woods, has a bunch of different names. These are edible, but you want to get them when they're fresh and fairly firm. When they're old and waterlogged, they can get bacteria and be kind of squishy and not so good. Okay, that was our top 10 choice. Couple other miscellaneous things related to those. There's a link here for Cantharellus discussions on my website and on Michael Kuo's if you want to learn more about chanterelles and some of the name changes going on. You can look at those 2 pages. We don't have Cantharellus sulphureus anymore in America. That's just European. This one came up, Ruth posted this the end of July, and I don't think this is the Chicago chanterelle, even though it's in the area here. And the reasons are that the cap is a very nice clean yellow color that's stained very bright yellow. The center of the cap is nice bright yellow. It's not really scruffy. So it's not, and these are expanded open caps, so they're not behaving like the Chicago chanterelle. Very bright. And then underneath here, you can see it's more orange, and the ridges aren't really that much different from the stem. So, so this one, I'm not sure what to call it. It might be flavus, but it seems a bit on the orange side, but these colors might be enriched in this photo. But we have a couple records of Cantharellus flavus. It's a yellow chanterelle described from Wisconsin. There's a question about the yellow oyster, we do have that in the Chicago region. There's some records of it showing up north and on the west side especially. Hunters finding it a lot on the west side. We found it once last year in Cook County, so look for some more in Cook County. It's escaped from different people's mushroom kits apparently, and it's all over, spreading all over the Midwest and out east. So we can look at a picture of that later. Other people say there's a lot of it in Galena, Illinois. Melody, message from Melody there. This is a chanterelle that Lorinda got earlier this summer up northwest of Chicago. And this one I think is Cantharellus phasmatis, the ghost chanterelle. This chanterelle is a very meaty chanterelle. It's a very good edible chanterelle. It has a much stronger odor. Our Chicago chanterelle doesn't have much odor. This Cantharellus phasmatis has a good odor. This is more common up in Wisconsin, and it has a lookalike species in northern Wisconsin. So there's two species that look the same. We're not sure about the ranges of either one, but we get this one down in Chicago a few times. You can see how thick the stem is, and it's white here. The ghost chanterelle is very pale underneath. Otherwise, it's a nice yellow color on top. This is Lorinda Sorensen got this in early July this year. This is not common around here. I used to see it more in Minnesota. It's an urban mushroom. I don't know why we don't have more of it. We got plenty of urban area. This is Lyophyllum decastes, or the chicken fried mushroom. It's in the Clitospe type group a little bit, but it's Lyophyllum. It looks like a big Clitospe. The gills aren't very decurrent, but it has white spores. It's in clumps, usually in the grass. And then here, Lorinda Suze has this picture of the Hygrophorus milky. It was Lactarius, now it's Lactifluus hygrophoroides. This is one of the really best edible Lactarius, or milk mushrooms. It's got lots of white milk that's sticky, and the gills are well spaced apart. So to learn this mushroom, look at other pictures where you can see the gills that have very wide spacing. Okay, now we're going to go on to the poisonous mushrooms. And again, these have pages, description pages on Michael Kuo's website if you want to read more about these. I couldn't find a decent picture of this Foliotina rugosa, this little albium that's very poisonous. So you have to look on that on Mushroom Observer to see what that looks like. It's a little brown mushroom with a ring. This is another little brown mushroom with a ring. This is Lorinda Suze got this one. This is Galerina marginata, the funeral bell. It's got the same deadly toxin as in the deadly Amanitas. Has a brown cap, brown spores, has a little brown ring on the stem. The ring is brown because it's catching the spores, the brown spores. The cap color can fade when it's older. And this grows on wood along with your other edibles that you might be collecting on logs. So you have to check every mushroom that you collect, make sure you don't get any of the deadly Galerina mixed in. This is typically cooler weather, so it's in the spring and the fall mostly. Here's the jack-o'-lantern, which is a lovely mushroom. It's bioluminescent. It glows if you have the lights off. You'll see it glowing. This grows in really big clumps of big orange mushrooms. It's growing up usually from the roots. It's also on dead stumps and dead wood. Here you can see underneath it's got bright orange gills. Some people confuse this with chanterelles, but most chanterelles don't grow in big clumps, and chanterelles have ridges instead of thin, crowded gills. So there's a difference in the structure. Also, if you cut these open, they're yellowish and mottled inside instead of white. Another picture of the nice decurrent orange gills underneath. Here's Amanita bisporigera. We've got several different deadly amanitas. This is one of the common ones. It's mycorrhizal with trees, so you need oak trees or some kind of tree nearby, but it can be in the city. Greg's seen it in a playground once. It's an amanita, so it has white spores and free gills. It has a vulva or cup at the base. That's from the universal veil that covers the whole mushroom when it's young. And then the partial veil breaks and leaves this skirt or ring on the stem here. Bisporigera is fairly slender for this group of amanitas. The other species we have, Amanita magnivolaris, is much sturdier, larger, thicker stem and a thicker veil that can have some yellowish color underneath. So there's some differences there. We have lots of different amanitas. If you're interested in amanitas, Britt Bunyard and Jay Justice just published a brand new book on amanitas of North America. That came out in June, so you can order that on the Fungi magazine website. And I don't know, on that other Amanita bisporigera picture I had, I'm not sure if the veils are always that high up on the stem. Sometimes they're might be a bit lower. Not sure how variable that might be. But this is another Amanita. It's got a different kind of cup. It's got a rimmed bulb here at the base, and it's got warts on the cap. So you can tell this is not the deadly destroying angel, but it could be one of the other poisonous amanitas. But I can't remember if this is going to be multisquamosa or one of the other ones. I get these mixed up. I don't see them often enough. Here's one of Brooke's favorite mushrooms. This is Haploplilus nigilans or rutilans, depending on which name you want to use. This is a very soft brown polypore that's poisonous. It has polyporic acid, which is poisonous. It's one of the few, or maybe the only poisonous polypores. And then the underside color is this kind of cinnamon brown, pinkish brown with the pores. Very lovely mushroom. The other thing this does is if you drop KOH, potassium hydroxide, on the cap, it'll turn lavender. Just a nice color reaction. We have a lot of different anosmias, and some of these are poisonous, or maybe all of them are poisonous. I don't know if there's any deadly ones. Inocybe or inocybe means fiber head. So these have a cap with radial fibers or scales on there, and they have brown spores. The gills might start out white or some other color, but the spores are brown. And these are very interesting, but you need a microscope to really figure them out. There's different characters with the spores and with the cells on the gills. And if you're collecting inospies, you want to be very careful taking good pictures and notes about all the surfaces. Different inospies have different bases, just like amanitas. They might have a rimmed base. They don't have a cup, but they have different shape structures at the base, and they have different surface features on the stem. So you don't want to handle them as much like this was. This stem has been handled a lot, so it's the cells are rubbed off, so you're losing some of the characters there. But they have different kinds of fibers and scales and patterns and colors on the top. And they have different odors also. Here's a Cortinarius. There's lots of Cortinarius, and a lot of them are hard to figure out. This one is a distinctive one that we've found only a couple times in Chicago and Wisconsin. It's Cortinarius rubripes, which means ruby foot. It's got this swollen red base, and a kind of reddish brown cap. So it's pretty distinctive for a Cortinarius. We'll see another Cortinarius later, but this is one of the pretty Cortinarius. It's red. And Alan took that picture at our annual show in 2016. Here's another one I threw in. This is Lepiota subincarnata. It's related to Jocerandii, which is a deadly Lepiota. There's a lot of different Lepiotas, big ones and small ones. The small ones tend to be poisonous, and this actual one has the a deadly toxin. And we had a severe poisoning case about 10 years ago in Chicago. Somebody ate these without knowing what they were. But it's a little Lepiota with kind of reddish brown scales, a little bit of reddish brown in the cap, and grows in mulch and stuff under trees. So this is an urban mushroom. We've seen it on the Field Museum campus and some other places in Chicago. So this is but it's a small Lepiota, so most people will be leaving it alone. The mushroom that does get people into trouble is Chlorophyllum molybdites, the green gilled Lepiota or parasol. It's a big parasol mushroom. It's the only one we have with green spores. It's an urban mushroom coming up in lawns in the summer when it's warm and wet. I don't know if anybody's seen it this year. This is from 4 years ago. I saw it last year or so in my neighborhood under a spruce tree. So it's fairly common in the city or across the country. It has big scales on the cap. The cap starts out round and then opens up into a parasol shape. The problem with this one is you don't see the green color in the gills until after you've eaten it and gotten sick. And then you go back and look at the ones you didn't eat and the gills have turned green a few hours after you collected it. When it's fairly young, the gills stay white for quite a while. So it's only when it's much older that you'll see the green spores. So there's another reason to take spore prints when you're not sure what you have. Now we're getting into the top 10 most common macrofungi. So this is these top 10 lists are based on our research data around Chicago. So most of this data is from oak woods and woodlands and a few forests and some other habitats. So mostly oak woodland species. So this list is the top 10 most common macrofungi. So out of all the macrofungi, we've got more than 1,200. These are the top 10 that we have found most of the time. And you'll see that actually none of these, well, one of these is edible. Well, more than one is edible. There's only one that people bother eating. So we're going to look through these in order. So the most commonly recorded mushroom or fungus in our data is the turkey tail. Second most common is the violet-pored polypore. And then coming in at number 9 is our dryad saddle. So there is an edible one in the list, but it's not, I wouldn't call it choice. So here's one of the pictures of Trametes that I found that does show the underside. So you want to look at both the top and bottom side of brackets and polypore things growing on wood, because both sides are going to give you information. So for the turkey tail, on the top, it's got different colored zones and hairs. It's got hair. And the thing I look for is the different colored zones plus these black lines. So the interesting thing about this turkey tail is underneath the hairs on the surface is a black, very thin black layer on the top of the cap. So there's a black layer on the top of the cap, but under the hairs. So in these zones where the hairs are short, you see the black color peeking out. Where the hairs are nice and thick and some other color, you don't see the black. So I look for these black lines on the top, along with the hairy and the different colors. And then underneath, I look for white pores. And when it gets older, the white pores turn a bit cream colored. And the pores are fairly roundish, a little bit angular, but fairly round pores. So hairy top with zones with the black lines and white pores underneath. And contrast that to false turkey tail here, which comes in a lot of different shades. These are more brightly colored than usual, but you can see it's got zones on the top. It has green color from algae that's in the hairs, but underneath it's smooth, white to yellow to orange, but it's smooth underneath. There's no pores on a false turkey tail, but it's very common. We've got a couple different kinds of false turkey tail. Another common bracket, second most common thing we find is the Trichaptum biforme, the violet pored polypore. This fades, the color on this fades out quite a bit when it's older. You'll find it out there from the previous year, but the violet color will be gone. When it's fresh though, it has this really nice violet color on the edge and the pores are violet. So it's really pretty when it's fresh. And that's very common. You find it sometimes on dead trees where it's covering like 6 or 8 feet up and down the tree. Another commonly found thing is Ganoderma applanatum. This is kind of an older specimen, shows some damage here from beetles. Ganoderma applanatum is perennial, so it adds a new layer each year. And this has pores underneath. You can see there's different growth zones here, but this might be like 3 years old. There's like, I think 3 major growths here. You can see the growth layers when you cut it open. And this has pores, but they're very, very tiny. A white pore surface and a brown context inside. So you can scratch the surface to have the brown color show up. So you can draw on the bottom of this. So it's called artist's conch, because you can draw pictures on it by just scraping it. I don't like collecting these because this is a perennial. So each year it gets bigger and adds another layer. And I'm worried that they're getting collected too much because I'm not seeing as many big old ones anymore. I see iNaturalist, when I was looking, a lot of them look like the first year brackets. This is a very common polypore that's a little bit harder to identify. This is called the mustard yellow polypore. When it's fresh like this, it has bright yellow edge and a more reddish brown top. It's in the Phasmatis group, so it's got brown pores and brown flesh. This group stains black with potassium hydroxide. And when this gets older, it fades, so it won't have the bright yellow color. It'll just be a dull brown. But it's very common, especially on oak. Here's Urpex. This is very common. Urpex has a couple key features. It's called effused reflexed, so that means that a lot of the fungus is flat on the wood, but the edges curve out, so it has these free edges, so like little caps on the edge. That's the reflexed part. So Urpex is one of the crusty-like polypores where the pores turn into toothy, the pores break up into toothy projections, but it has these free capped edges. So you have to look for those two things in combination, the toothy pores along with the free edge and the white color. Urpex lacteus. Lacteus refers to the milk color. Another common polypore is Neophavelus alveolaris. It used to be Pleurotus. When it's fresh, it's bright orange, and then it fades. It sticks around quite a while, but then fades until it's really pale. And the pores underneath are these nice hexagonal elongated pores. It's also called diamond pore bracket because of the pore shape. It's got these large angular pores underneath. Otherwise, it's orangey on the top and the bottom. These are a little bit older, so it's more yellow or yellow-brown. And then here is another polypore we've got in the top 10 list, Pleurotus varius, or if you want to use the name Gyroporus varius, you can. I'm not using that name yet, but I'm still holding out. But this is the black-footed polypore. It's got a stem that's fairly central. It's got little pores, and you can see it's got a black base on the stem. This is a bit variable, and there's a couple different names floating around for these. And I'm not quite confident on which name to put on which one. There's a size difference in the mushroom and the size of the wood it's on. But that's Pleurotus varius. The other names are elegans and leptocephalus. You might see those names around. Here's Pleurotus squamosus, and this has been moved into Gyroporus also. And this is our dryad saddle. It's got the scaly cap. It gets this dark brown color developing in the center. And then underneath, it's got a fat stem. If we have that, we don't really have the stem showing. But it also has fairly large pores. And it's somewhat fleshy when it's fresh, so you can eat this when it's young. And it has when it's young, it has a smell of watermelon rind or cucumber. And so it's kind of a favorite edible because it's people can find it reliably. Here's another edible which very few people eat because it's not, there's only a couple countries that eat it. This is Schizophyllum communi. It's very common around the world. This is a species of fungus that has lots of different mating type combinations. So it's got thousands of mating types around the world. So it has no problem finding a compatible partner out in the wild. But it's got a fuzzy cap with sort of grooves in the cap edge. And the key feature is underneath the split gills. So it has unusual gills. It's not related to the other gilled mushrooms. It has a separate origin of gill structures. And these gills are pleated in two parts. So the gill can actually splits and rolls up when it's dry. So when you find these when they're dry, the gills are rolled up inside so that the spore layer is rolled up inside, and you'll see the hairy edges in between the split gills. So it's pretty cool. Okay, now we've got top 10 most common gilled mushrooms. I'm going to go through these a little faster probably here. Galerina marginata is a repeat. We'll just show that briefly. Another Inocebi, another Amanita, inky cap, and the Armillaria gallica, and then a foliota. So we have several Pluteus. We've got these big brown ones that most people call Pluteus cervinus. And there's actually several species in this group, and I haven't worked on them under the microscope to figure out which ones we have here. There's a couple scientific papers on these. But it's safe enough to call this Pluteus cervinus, the fawn mushroom. It's an edible mushroom. I'm not sure it's that good, but Pluteus group has free gills here, like Amanita, so the gills don't attach to the stem, and Pluteus usually has a big gap, so it's very obvious that the gills don't touch the stem. Pluteus has pinkish brown or salmon brown spores, so the gills at some point start turning pinkish brown. But this is our big Pluteus with the brown cap. We have some big white Pluteus. We have a bunch of Mycena galericulata. We have a bunch of Mycena. One of the common ones is galericulata, which is a gray Mycena that's in small clumps. This was a picture I picked out of the choices that looked fairly somewhat standard for what I call galericulata, with the brown striate cap. It's got these lines or striations on the cap. It's in the brown color group along with a brown stem, and the clumps are on the small side. There's some other species with different colors or paler or in big clumps. So Mycenas are kind of tricky, but you can see the gray-brown cap with the brown stem. This Mycena is one of the easiest to identify, Mycena hematopus. It's got the red color in the cap and in the stem, and this has a red juice. And I picked this one because this person took a nice picture of showing the red juice inside when you break it open. So she's got, they have red staining on their finger from the juice. There's red juice inside the stem. So Mycena hematopus, that means bloodfoot. I forget who Myconaut is. Somebody in our group. Here's another Galerina marginata with the brown cap and the little ring on the stem, brown gills, brown spores. Most Russula you can't get names on, and actually we're finding out that the European names don't work for American Russulas anyway, so I'm like not working on Russula till some of that gets straightened out. But this is a Russula that we had trouble with in the Chicago region, and we were using a couple different names for it. And Peter Avis with his DNA sequencing got us straight on which name to use. But we're calling this Pectinatoides. It's in the Russula aminolens group, or Russula fetid group, which usually have either nasty smells or sweet smells like almond. And they're different sizes. This is a smaller one that has a bit of an unpleasant odor. But this usually has a bit of a pinkish color in the cap and sometimes pinkish stains on the stem. Otherwise, it's kind of a yellow, or more on the yellowish brown rather than a gray brown. There's another one, Russula aminolens, that we got confused with it. That's more of a gray brown cap. It's the same size, but doesn't have any of the red color in it anywhere. Here is Inocybe, and some of the Inocypes got split into a couple different genera. So Inocybe ramosa got split over into Pseudosperma. But this is a typical Inocybe with the split cap. So you definitely don't want to eat any of those little brown mushrooms. This shows a feature on Inocybe to look for. I don't know if you can see on your screen, but the gills on here have whitish edges, and there's white spots on the stem. That's from sterile cells on the gill edges in the stem, cystidia, these sterile cells, and they reflect the light. So they make the surface there look white on the edges of the gills. But some Inocypes don't have those, so they won't have white edges on the gills. So the white edge on the gills and the white cystidia on the stem are one of the things you look for when you're sorting out Inocypes. And yeah, this is a split cap. Inocybe ramosa, ramos means that the cap is split. So you can see there's fibers, but there's splits in that cap surface. Here's Amanita fulva. This is an Amanita with a really nice vulva, but there's no partial veil in this group of Amanitas. So this is in the marginata group, or the grisettes is an old name. These are the brown and gray Amanitas that don't have a partial veil, but have a nice striate cap and a nice big vulva on the stem. And this is from Carol Nelson, who's still active on iNaturalist. Here's one a lot of you know, the mica inky cap, Coprinellus micaceus. I picked this picture because it shows the granules on the young cap. You can see all those little whitish granules that look like mica flakes. That's how it got its name. And this inky cap is in big clumps with, usually with rotted wood. It comes up in urban areas where people remove trees. It'll be coming up on the stump or what's left of the buried root base. So this is an edible inky cap, but I don't know if it's that good. Somebody can let me know later if they like it. Here's Armillaria gallica. This is our most common honey cap. And this shows the veil is more cottony fibrous. So when it breaks, it leaves sort of a fibrous area on the stem instead of a nice ring. And this also shows the brown color and the hairy surface, especially in the upper left here. That's a very typical Gallica, Armillaria gallica, with the brown color and the really obvious little tufts of hairs on there. iNaturalist gives common names for everything, and I'm not sure where all of these come from, but this is called bulbous honey fungus. It usually has these, the stem base is usually swollen. And again, this is usually in small clumps. It's a weaker parasite, so it's more on dead wood and dead roots than on live trees. But it's also edible. This is Pholiota polychroa. It's one of our more common Pholiotas. It's got variable color. When it's young, it's a reddish purple, and then it fades to a brown or a yellow. So polychroa means many colors. It's a Pholiota, so it has scales on the cap, and it's got brown spores, and it grows on wood. So you can look for that one. There's lots of pretty pictures of it online. I'm going to switch to these quizzes instead of looking at these most difficult genera, except I want to show one of these Cortinarius pictures. It's really nice. But you can, on your own time, look at these other ones here or read about them on Kuo. This is, Ruth posted this nice picture 4 days ago of a Cortinarius, one of the purple Cortinarius. So there's a bunch of different Cortinarius out there. Several are purple, quite a few are purple. I don't know the names of which purple ones we have, except for one that is purple and yellow combination. But this shows the really typical, or really a good example of the cortina, which is a cobwebby veil underneath the cap. And this is what gives Cortinarius its name, is the cortina or curtain. So this curtain of fibers underneath the cap, and you can see it's just starting to break and reveal the brown gills here. So yeah, Cortinarius are really lovely to take pictures of. Let's see. So some of these purple Cortinarius, you can get confused with the bluet, Clitospe nuda, so you want to be able to tell those apart. Cortinarius are going to have brown spores and this veil, and the bluet does not, has pale spores and no veil. Okay, now we're going to get a few different examples here and some things I found that were not labeled right, and we're going to see if anybody knows what they are or has better guesses. We'll start with these here. But first, Brooke and I and Lorinda Suze, this is one of our favorite mushrooms because we're apparently one of the few people in the country that can find it. If you look on this map, there's 2 or 3 places this has been found in Chicago area, and there's a collection here in Washington 3 years ago in May, and ours are also in the spring here. So the observations we have, there's only 4 observations so far on iNaturalist, the one in Washington and the local ones by us. So let's see. So Brooke found it this spring when he ventured out to the spot where we know it is. And then this is the fellow in Washington State. And then I have a collection from Schiller Woods, a different location. And then this is the first record that went up on here, 2018, that Lorinda got up in her area. But this is Coleoriza hygrophoroides. It's a very rare mushroom with this kind of lovely orange chestnut cap, kind of orangey gills, orangey stem, and it's got a rooting stem. It comes up in the spring, about the same time as morels, or maybe a little bit before morels. but middle of May, I guess. And this is one of the mushrooms that we worked on for, somebody proposed it for the endangered list for the US several years ago, and Greg and a colleague from Europe hosted a meeting out west on working on rare and endangered fungi in the US. And we had several dozen proposed, and we worked on how much data we had on these. So this is one of the ones that was proposed because there are so few records of it. But the problem with this one is there's not enough records of it actually to figure out how rare it is and what the distribution is. So some of these rare mushrooms, it's really hard to get information on it when there's so little data. But it is a lovely mushroom. Okay, here's one I saw today that's labeled Omphaliotus illudens. And this is by Kathleen, who is an excellent person with plants, but not so excellent with mushrooms. Anyway, so we're going to look at through some pictures here. This is on the side of a tree. She thinks it might be an elm tree, I'm not sure. So there's a little mushroom there. There's some mushrooms here. People can type in the chat if they want, if they have a guess. Another picture is underneath. It's got a shiny brown orange cap. It's got pale, kind of pale orange gills. And Hunter is saying enoki or Galerina. Anybody else agree with one of those? So enoki and Galerina, the Flammulina velutipes and the Galerina marginata look very similar. So if you're going to collect the Flammulina, eat it, you want to for sure know the difference. So the clues I see here are the shiny cap. Of course, when you have it in hand, it's a lot easier. But the shiny cap indicates that it's sticky or viscid. So the Flammulina is going to have a sticky cap, and the Galerina does not have a sticky cap. They both have smooth caps, but the Galerina is not sticky. The other thing here is the stem. You can see it looks a little bit hairy, maybe a little bit fuzzy. At least I can see it on my screen. And there's no ring on these. No evidence of a ring. And the gills are not brown. The gills are not dark brown, but you know, that might be because it's young, but you want to do a spore print. If this has white spores, then it's the enoki. Brown spores makes it the Galerina. So this is a case where you want to be able to identify it. This is May 23rd, 2020. So this is the spring. Flammulina is a cool season mushroom. So you can see right now it says Omphaliotus illudens, and it says needs ID because there's only one proposed name. So I was doing this with my class this summer. I had a summer class. So if we look at, if you click your mouse in the suggestion identification box here, iNaturalist will give you some suggestions based on the photo. It has some kind of algorithm for matching photos, and sometimes it's very good and sometimes it's not. It really depends on the quality of the pictures that you have. So since these pictures aren't as good, you can see some of the matches like Ganoderma tsugae and Dryas saddle, you know, or a foliota, and you know, basically it isn't any of these. So I'm going to type in Flammulina. So you start typing in the name, and then you select the name you want here for velvet stem, and then you do done. And then you have your name registered in here, and then up here it'll change to since we have two competing names here, the these names don't agree. So what iNaturalist does in its system is to move up to the next higher classification that includes both of those names. That's usually a genus or a family. In this case, it's a suborder, Marasmianae, which is not a suborder, I know, but it's a suborder that has Marasmius and related stuff. And Pleurotus and Flammulina are both in this suborder. So I'm surprised they have suborders in this system. Anyway, this needs one or more people to come along, and when you log in, if you want to agree, so Hunter can do this, if you want to log in, find this observation, you can click agree with me, or you can click agree with the other person, and then that gets another vote for that name. And what you need to do is get enough votes so that 2/3 of the name suggestions, more than 2/3 match, and then it'll switch over to that name. So it's a different kind of voting system than what's on Mushroom Observer. This one is labeled Amanita muscaria. Do you say yay or nay? It's got yellow warts on a yellow cap. Brooke is shaking his head no. Hunter says nay. Any suggestions on what it is? Brooke and I don't have our Amanita book yet, so. But there's 2 yellow Amanitas like this. I get them mixed up. Or actually, there's 3. There's several yellow Amanitas. So Hunter is asking if it's Flaviconia. The other one is Frostiana. I would have to check and compare to like Michael Kuo's pictures and stuff, but Flaviconia is a good guess on that. But it's definitely not muscaria. Why is it not muscaria? Yeah, well, this picture doesn't show the basal bulbs, so we don't really know what's going on down there, but as far as we can tell, there's no basal bulb, which is correct. There's a little bit of flakes of some veil. I don't know if Brooke had a, oh yeah, so muscaria, there's different color forms for muscaria. The muscaria we have in our area is variety Gassoi, which has yellow to pale orange cap. Yeah, so our Amanita is yellow or orange. It's not red. The red one is like over in Russia and on the West Coast. And also, I would say the warts on muscaria are usually white and not yellow. Somebody can disagree on that. But the other thing is, muscaria will have rings or ridges here on the stem because the veil breaks up on the stem and leaves some little kind of little collars at that. And Brooke says it would be bigger at this stage. Yeah, probably bigger cap at that stage. This is from, I'm not sure, oh, this is from Ruth. This is really cool. She found this like this past week. This is a really pretty picture of this. This is Trametes conchifer. It's related to turkey tail, but it has a feature that the other Trametes that I know of do not have, maybe some in the tropics, but this is a Trametes that has regular brackets here. It's got kind of brown, gray to pale brown brackets here, and underneath it would have white pores, but it also has these cups. So you often find it sometimes just with the cups, sometimes with the brackets, hopefully with both, and then it's easy to identify when you have both. But it's got these cups that have little zones, and these are splash cups. So this has 2 ways to make spores. It can make sexual spores the normal way in the pores underneath, and it makes asexual spores or ooidia, some kind of fragmenting propagule thing in the cup on the top, and those can splash out from the rainwater. So it's got little splash cups that are separate just for making the asexual spores. So it's one of the few mushroom thingies that can reproduce 2 different ways. So you can look for that. It favors elm trees, dead elm branches. Carol posted this a little more than a week ago. This is a hydnellum. And the hydnellum we have, the common hydnellum we have with oak trees is Hydnellum spongiosipes, which means sponge foot. It's got a larger base that's spongy, so kind of soft and spongy. Hydnellum have teeth underneath here, which makes it look kind of like a hydnum, but it's not related to the sweet tooth hydnum. It's in a different group, but this is a hydnellum. There's other hydnellum you find other parts of the country with conifer trees. There's also some other hydnellum with oaks or hardwoods. Here's a scleroderma, and anybody know which scleroderma this is? It's our small scleroderma, and I like to refer to this surface as looking like puffed wheat, because that's what I remember from being a kid. Puffed wheat has this little brown flecked surface. Also, this puffball has a base to it and white cords that are in the soil or a little bit of woody debris. And this is a scleroderma areolatum, refers to the areolate pattern on the cap. So I put that down here, scleroderma areolatum. Okay, here's a mystery one that Ruth had that I didn't put a name on yet. Any guesses on this? Not quite enough information to go by, but we've got a pale stem. We've got gills. You can guess what color gills these are. One guess is Pleurotus. I hadn't considered that. I guess, does this show whether the gills are free or not? That's the big guess. Hunter is agreeing with Brooke on Pleurotus leoninus. So that's the best guess we've got so far. I'd have to compare to some other pictures. But you can see the gills are kind of getting pinkish. So if this has free gills, then I would say Pleurotus. If it's got attached gills, then I would go towards Entoloma. This also depends if it's actually on the wood or on the ground. It's not quite clear here. But the Pleurotus leoninus is the best guess. And Robert says 3 kingdoms in one photo. So we've got the mushroom and the lichen kingdom, then the plant kingdom, and the algae in the lichen, I guess. I'm going to show you 2 lentinus, and then 2 things that are not lentinus. And then a couple rust fungi that are in the spring. And a dung fungus that I have not found myself. So here's Lentinus tigrinus. This is a cute little lentinus that grows around here, usually in floodplains on dead wood down where it floods. It likes drier wood, but also that's in floodplains for our area anyway. Lentinus tigrinus has these brown scales on the cap. It's got a depressed center. And underneath, it has gills. And lentinus group have sawtooth gills. So you can see the edges of the gills are irregular, like they're kind of like a sawtooth or kind of cut up. So this is, but look at the brown scaly stem, the white sawtooth gills, and then the brown scaly cap. So that's Lentinus tigrinus. We also have Lentinus lepidius, which is a bigger species with gills. You'll see other pictures of this lentinus with the aborted surface underneath. Brooke apparently has eaten this. You can ask him how he does that. Here's Lentinus arcularius. This is a polypore. So it's got the brown It's not doesn't show as well here, but it's got a brown scaly top and a brown scaly stem. But you can see it's got these jagged pores underneath instead of gills. So this used to be Pleurotus, but now it got moved into lentinus because it's related to the other lentinus. So this is actually a lentinus with pores. So lentinus includes pores and gills. But lentinus itself is related to polypores and not the other gilled mushrooms. Okay, so that's lentinus arcularius. That's fairly common. Lorinda Sorensen has that one. Yay. That's in the spring. It's usually in the spring. Here's the lentinus tigrinus that is not a lentinus. Okay, what do people think this is? Yep, dryad saddle. So here's dryad saddle, side view. This is a decent dryad saddle. It's a little bit older and a little bit faded out. So, so dryad saddle is a polypore. Lentinus is a polypore. So when they're both in the polypore family. So when I put in, if we check iNaturalist, you can see top choice here is dryad saddle. So iNaturalist knows what it is. So I don't know why this person chose the other name. So now up here, it'll say family Polyperaceae because both of these names are in that family. Okay, here's another thing. I have no clue why this got labeled as lentinus. This is tricky. Brooke or Lorinda Suze, I would think, could guess what this is. They've seen it, certainly. Or Greg, or anybody can make a guess. This isn't quite typical because it's a young piece and it's usually more spread out and more of an edge on the cap instead of just a flat thing with wrinkles. It's a little bit gelatinous, but it's not a jelly. Yeah, so Greg is asking if it's a phlebia. Yes, it's in the phlebia group. It's got marulioid pores or marulioid surface. This is called a marulioid surface with this wrinkled kind of ridges and forked ridges here. So it's in the phlebia group. Anybody know which phlebia or marulius this might be? When this is normally developed, it's got pinkish color on the cap, on the top of the cap. Yeah, tremulosa. Brooke got it. Yep. So I don't know if iNaturalist is going to figure this one out. Let's see how it does. Looking for Marulius tremulosus, number 3 on the list here. It's pretty good. So that's a picture by Hadley Randall in Winnetka, Illinois from last October. Here's 2 rust fungi. Lorinda Sorensen got this in, I'm guessing in May. This is the common cedar apple rust. This is a rust fungus that makes these tentacle thingies on juniper trees in the spring. And this is a stage of the life cycle where it makes spores that then spread to the alternate host. I'm not sure if it's an apple tree or hawthorn or crabapple or what in that case. That's Gymnosperangium juniperi virginiae because it grows on Juniperus virginianus. So you can see that around the city. This is another Gymnosperangium you can find in the spring. This is, I like this one a lot because it's a pinkish orange. And instead of tentacles, it makes these little tubes and it makes the spores inside the tubes and they kind of shake out. Gymnosperangium clavipes. And this grows on some fruit trees. But this one makes this kind of gall with these orange horns that make the spores. So it's pretty cool. And then this one, somebody posted, I saw this, this is actually up north of Chicago a bit, but this is a Phycomyces that's on some dung. So this is an entirely different group of fungi. A small dung fungus with these little yellow structures. So this is a very short-lived thing that grows on the dung and then makes spores here and then kind of melts away. So that's pretty cool. Again, you can go back to this page, and if you need to learn some of these species, you can click on the links for Michael Kuo, or you can Google the names or look at the other pictures of this on iNaturalist.